having not eaten, having not gotten any sleep in really the last 24 hours, I was really hurting. And the rest of the crew that I was with was also hurting for different reasons, and it was very difficult for all of us. But I think I was probably in the worst shape of all of us. We weren't where we were supposed to be. Everybody was moving really slowly. The sun was starting to get to the place where we were going to get a sunrise. And I remember that I was just kind of swaying back and forth a lot. I was just thinking very like primitive thoughts of just like get one foot in front of the other. I didn't have like really higher level thinking at this point. And someone recommended checking my pulse oximeter reading, and my oxygen levels had dipped to 67%. 67%.
Hey friends, welcome back to Prepping with Sarge. So today I am going to be giving you part 2 of the interview with my brother Jay about his hike or climb up Mount Kilimanjaro. It's more of a hike than a climb. The first part, if you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to highly recommend that you watch that. I'll put a link up here somewhere. And that one is more about like gear and training as he got ready to go on the climb for Mount Kilimanjaro. This one here is he's going to be talking about the mental aspects of it and that man versus environment kind of thing, which is what a lot of us really appreciate, and that drive that we like when we go out. And this is part of why a lot of us get into like survival culture and that kind of stuff, is just like learning to conquer your own will and the desire to just say, you know, it's time to go home. I think I'm going to climb into my bed and be comfortable again. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get right to part 2. So what was it like when you were approaching the summit?
My summit experience started actually probably 24 hours prior. You, as hikers, start in Karanga camp, and you need to get up to Barafu camp, which is the base camp from which you do the ascent for your final summit. And that ascent happens at 11:30 p.m. at night because the rocks and the snow start to harden, and it creates a better surface for your ascent. Starting at Karanga camp, that previous night we had our dinner, which was prepared by the porters and the guides. And around 10 o'clock, this is the last night before we go up to the summit, from which we'll get some sleep. Around 10 o'clock, I started getting really ill. I think that I got food poisoning, and I was up running to the toilets every hour or so, starting around 10 p.m. I started taking Imodium. I ran out of purified water. It was around 12 or 1 a.m. that I woke the main guide up and said that I was experiencing these problems. He was asking how much Imodium I had taken, and I said that I took 2 tablets, and he said keep taking that until diarrhea stops. He gave me the rest of his purified water, and then the next morning we were going to be boiling more. When I woke up that next morning after a night of restless sleep, and it's unclear if this was food poisoning or acclimatization sickness, but I tend to believe that it was food poisoning because we had some pretty old food at that point that we had been taking with us the whole time. That next morning, I was drinking a lot of water as much as I could, but I couldn't eat any food for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So we're hiking from Karanga to Barafu camp, and I'm losing energy along the way. And we get to Barafu, it's snowing and there's some sleet, and it's very cold. We get into our tents and we have like an hour or 2 of rest, and then we're supposed to have dinner and then start the summit ascent. During that time, I couldn't really eat anything, but I was still drinking a lot of water, and it was around 11:30 that we had our final pulse oximeter readings, and mine came back fairly normal, and we were all gonna make the ascent. So the ascent is supposed to take, I think, 6 to 8 hours. It's not really a lot. It's a 4,000 feet elevation gain, and it's like a quarter of a mile or something like that. So it's not anything that we haven't done before. But having not eaten, having not gotten any sleep in really the last 24 hours, I was really hurting. And the rest of the crew that I was with was also hurting for different reasons. And it was very difficult for all of us. But I think I was probably in the worst shape of all of us. It was probably about 6 hours in that we weren't where we were supposed to be. Everybody was moving really slowly. The sun was starting to get to the place where we were going to get a sunrise. And I remember that I was just kind of swaying back and forth a lot. I was just thinking very like primitive thoughts of just like get one foot in front of the other. I didn't have like really higher level thinking at this point. And someone recommended checking my pulse oximeter reading, and my oxygen levels had dipped to 67%, which was pretty low. It was at that point that the guides brought oxygen, and I was very thankful for that. I got some oxygen, and then I could start to think clearly again. And it was through that we started to continue going up to the summit. And oxygen levels started to dip back down again, but we were able to get to the top eventually. I think it took us 6 more hours than we were expecting. We were out of water, and we were starting to run out of food. And when we got to the top, it's funny because you see this iconic sign that everybody goes and they take their picture at the summit. And if you watch videos of what's happening, everyone is very excited in the photos. They're smiling, they're cheering, and then as soon as someone snaps the photo, they go back to this state of like, my body is dying right now. I don't want to be here. Why are we even taking photos? We should be descending immediately.
Yeah.
And then someone says, okay, next photo. You can put that smile back on, but in your head, you're just thinking, I need to get off of this summit. I can't breathe right now.
So everything in your body starts to scream that this is not safe. I need to go home.
Exactly. And it's funny because every step you're taking on the way up is just, it's like you're underwater, and you're losing energy with each step that you take, just like if you're underwater for a long time and you're swimming and you start to run out of air. And when we started to descend, it was completely different. Even just the first few steps going down instead of up and not having that resistance from the mountain, we could just start to move a little bit faster. When you descend, there's volcanic ash that you start to go down instead of the ice path that you took on the way up. And you can just take like really big steps, almost like you're bouncing, and you just sink into this volcanic ash, and it kind of like pads your blow as you're kind of like taking these big jumps down the mountain.
Huh.
And while it took us 12 hours to get up, it took us like an hour and a half to get back down.
Oh, wow.
And it was so great once we were able to get back to Barafu, and then later getting down into the moorlands. You can't sleep there because you still are at high risk for altitude sickness. So you actually go all the way down to another camp where you're starting to get back into the moorlands where there's a lot more oxygen.
Do you start getting like a head rush or like an oxygen high at that point when it starts getting back into your lungs?
I don't think that we got an oxygen high per se, but certainly we had a lot of symptoms of headaches and nausea that a lot of the crew was experiencing, and that started to be reduced as we got more into the moorlands.
Okay. So listening back to all of that, do you think, so you had the, basically almost got dehydrated, which is definitely out in wilderness survival situations, foodborne illnesses or impure water is such a huge risk, which is why it's like one of the most critical pieces of survival. And then the Imodium, I always carry Imodium when I'm traveling. I always have, and I check the dates on it, I rotate it, I keep Imodium. Aspirin, actually, for like if somebody's having a heart condition in your party, you can buy them some time with some. Of course, this is not medical advice. This is just a YouTube channel for entertainment purposes only. But dehydration can kill you. Heart attack certainly can kill you. You'd want to buy some time there. And I also keep Benadryl for allergic reactions, because not that it's going to stop it, but it can slow it down and buy you some time to hopefully get to medical care. So all that in mind, did you have moments in that last part of that journey where you felt like, I'm going to die on this mountain?
I remember telling the guide that I was pretty confident that I could make it to the summit, but that I didn't know how I was going to get down. And I didn't realize that there was going to be a different path that was going to be a lot easier for us to get down. But the way that we went up on the ice, there's really not a way that you can get down from there, because the snow starts to melt, it gets very slippery, and it was just so steep. So going down that way would be extremely dangerous. And I remember on the way up, I'm like, I think I can get to the summit, but I'm not sure what we're going to do about getting down. But they had full confidence, having done the trail so many different times, seeing the difference between having to take steps up versus steps down, and just, I guess, maybe the mental motivation of having just summited and gaining all of that morale boost really helped out a lot.
Awesome. Excellent. All right, Jay, thank you so much for being on my channel today and telling us all about your adventure. I have 2 more questions for you. First one is, do you have any other tips for anybody in the survival or preparedness community that might be, from your experience, that might be helpful?
Well, I think one thing that I really learned or it was drove home for me with Mount Kilimanjaro is that I thought that I was a pretty good hiker, thought I was a pretty good backpacker. I was in very good shape at the time, doing training every single weekend. And one of the things that I learned is that with altitude, you never know how your body is going to behave at high altitudes, especially if you haven't been at those altitudes before, if you haven't spent a lot of time going through acclimatization. So I think that just always staying humble, making sure that you understand your body, making sure that you understand when you're experiencing symptoms from altitude sickness or otherwise, and don't put yourself into dangerous situations.
Very good. And last question, are you ready for your next mountain?
It's funny that you asked that. When we were on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, when we were snapping those pictures and we were all miserable and we're like, oh, our bodies are dying right now, the answer was, of course, no. And about 20 minutes into the descent, when we were starting to breathe again and coming back to our senses, we started joking about what is our next adventure going to be. Is it going to be Aconcagua in South America? Or are we going to do Mount Vinson and Antarctica? And so I don't think that this is the end of the journey for the 7 summits for us, but it's one of those things. Just keep preparing, make sure that you're focusing on what do you want to do, because there may not be a tomorrow. So think about what are those dreams, what are those bucket list items, and then just try and work toward those little by little.
Absolutely. Set your goals, be realistic, and keep pushing forward, right?
Right.
All right. I really appreciate you, Jay. This is my little brother, Jay. This is Prepping with Sarge. Keep planting your seeds, keep stacking your silver. We will see you on the next video.